After the first 3 core games in the Resident Evil series in 2000, Resident Evil takes its next step forward, moving itself to the next generation of consoles, this time to the Sega Dreamcast. Now, this was a console exclusive only at launch, and later both a PS2 and a GameCube version came out in a kind of an updated form, sporting new cutscenes to flesh out more of the story. While acclaimed as one of the best Resident Evil games at the time, I don't really think it holds up at all today. In fact, I think this game kinda sucks. From the weapons to the storytelling, characters to boss fights, it all feels pretty lackluster compared to the other 3 in the series, and I didn't even like 3 all that much. In this video, I want to give a fair take on Code Veronica, as played on the PS2, the goods, the bads, and the outright confusing. If you're new here to the channel and enjoy content like this, consider subscribing, as it definitely helps and lets you know when new videos get posted here. And go ahead and check out the other retrospectives we've done here on the channel as well, including the prior Resident Evil games 1, 2, and 3. Now with that, let's hop into Code Veronica. We open Code Veronica with a pre-rendered cutscene of Claire running through some Umbrella operatives, chasing her through a facility, helicopters opening up with chain guns, and eventually jumping down a staircase only to be captured by the soldiers down below. Over the scene, we have a narrator recount the events that happened, learning Claire had infiltrated the Umbrella facility here in Paris 3 months after the Raccoon City incident, still looking for her brother Chris. The scene ends with Claire stuck in a jail cell in a different place altogether. This cutscene from the very beginning of the game kind of just rubbed me the wrong way, a feeling that would follow me throughout the rest of this game. This is mainly due to the tone set here being much more of an action-focused title and having actual Umbrella being the bad guys here, rather than the biomutants this game has been known for thus far. This chase scene in the hallway with an IR camera helicopter dumping thousands of rounds into one girl does not carry what Resident Evil was all about. Resident Evil is slow, quiet, slowly building tension to a crazy finale with rocket launchers and massive bioweapons, and here we are mag dumping from a helicopter at the main protagonist. Also, why was Claire looking for Chris on the 45th floor of a skyscraper in Paris? It just doesn't make any sense to me, with some additional explanation being woefully needed. Not that Resident Evil is known for its writing, and I applaud the effort of trying to flesh out the world and continuing narrative thus far, especially with these recurring characters, but this just kind of feels lazy, like the scene was designed around the spectacle and not the other way around, something which will occur a few times throughout Code Veronica. However, unlike the other games in the series thus far, this is actually a lot of story and character progression here in Code Veronica, conveyed through rendered cutscenes and not just dialogue as the past games had before. As Claire escapes the prison cell and makes her way through the prison complex on Rockford Island, amongst yet another T-virus outbreak, we run into a fellow prisoner named Steve Burnside, who takes pot shots at Claire, thinking she's either Umbrella or a zombie. The two make fast introductions, and Steve runs off to find a way to escape by himself, having the every man for himself mentality, a vast dichotomy from Claire. Despite the corny dialogue and sketchy voice acting in Code Veronica, something this series has been known for thus far, it is hard not to enjoy the main characters on display here, the main one being Claire, Steve, and Chris. Taking place 3 months after Resident Evil 2, you could see the growth of Claire's character and resolve, obviously much tougher than she was in Raccoon City. Seeing the risk she takes in the beginning cutscene, the playing the game of chicken with a helicopter gun, and staying collected while being shot at by Steve, it's safe to say that Claire has developed into a bit of a badass here in Code Veronica, having been through Raccoon City, though it would have made anybody grizzled in the face of zombies and psychopaths. On the other side of the scale, we have Steve. This Canadian hothead is the complete opposite of Claire. He's brash and whiny and pretty fucking annoying, epitomizing the scene where he steals the golden Lugers needed to unlock the door in the Alexander mansion, demanding Claire find him something that shoots fast to trade him for. He does begin to have a redemption arc, however. After clearing the path for Claire in the basement of the military base, Steve runs face to face with a shambling corpse of his father, the man he risked his life to find. Upon this revelation, we begin to see a new Steve, a young man now dealing with the trauma of the loss of his father, begins to have a renewed focus and commitment to getting out and helping Claire in the process. While after the first meeting, I struggled with Steve to enjoy him as a character due to his outright annoyingness and his overtly Canadian accent. I'm sorry, Canadians. After the revelation of his father, he begins to grow on me a bit more, even so much as I was hoping that the inevitable mild romantic connection felt pretty nice, albeit rushed as hell. The other playable character is Chris, Claire's brother and one of the STARS members from the original Resident Evil 1. While not so much changed from the first game, his resolve to stopping Umbrella is much deeper, and when obtaining the message from Leon in Resident Evil 2 about Claire's capture, Chris moves fast to save his sister. Although Chris is a pretty one-note character, your generic tough guy action hero, I can't help but just like him, and watching him contend with his sense of duty in defeating Wesker and returning Bad from Resident Evil 1 and Redfield's old commander, as well as his sense of duty to stop Umbrella in all their genetic experiments. Commitment really comes into full form when, at the very end of the game, moving to escape during the self-destruct sequence on the Antarctic base, leaves his sister, who he's there to actually save, behind to go and stop Wesker and prevent his plans from furthering even more. Watching a man put his feelings and family literally to the side to complete the mission that he's been set out to do after the events of Resident Evil 1 is somehow commendable, and I'm here for it. A character doesn't have to be so deep and complex like an Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2 to be enjoyable. He could just be a fucking cool guy, which is what Chris is. He's a fucking cool guy. And I like Chris a whole lot, and personally was happy to see his return after being out of the limelight since the original outing of Resident Evil. Code Veronica begins to do what prior games haven't so far, and that is to establish more of the characters in the Resident Evil universe, how they interconnect, and their impact on the world, which is important that we'll see these characters return time and time again. Hell, even Leon has a small mention here, shedding some light that what the rookie cop's been doing since, well, Resident Evil 2. Having been asked by Claire to get in touch with Chris means that the two seem to be kind of like a middleman connection between them, with Claire obviously keeping their bond alive months after the incidents in Raccoon City. Having the main protagonists from the first games collide also gives more credence to the connected world, which is much different outside of just mildly revisiting Jill in Resident Evil 2, hasn't been done yet in the series. While I enjoy these main protagonists, however, we need to set up the other players in the story, that being the antagonists, and this is where I get real lost in Code Veronica. We have two villains to set up here in Code Veronica, one recurring baddie and one new one, and neither here are all that great. The main bad here on Rockmore Island, as well as the subsequent Antarctic base, is Alfred Ashford, a crazed man whose family we learn is not only responsible for creating the Umbrella Corporation to an extent, but the original version of the T-Virus, known as the T Veronica virus, hence the naming convention of this game. Alfred as a character kind of sucks, with no real motivations other than stopping Claire and Steve because they are there. As Claire and Steve continue searching for a way to get off the island, they see a woman sitting in a room claiming to be his sister Alexia. Giving chase, they find a wig sitting in the middle of the room and find Alfred hiding above them, revealing that he's actually suffering from a dual personality disorder, impersonating his sister as well. We learn through logs of the troubled history Alfred endured, his creation through genetic manipulation, along with his sister Alexia. Genetically modified to have superior intelligence, Alexia outstripped him in every way, making him the lesser of the siblings and making her essentially what can be known as a prodigy. And with that, his losing both of his father, Alexander, and sister to the T Veronica virus through self-experimentation. Always playing second fiddle to his sister, he struggles with this, and while idolizing her, also seemingly resents her at the same time. While the backstory of Alfred is actually pretty great, it's told through missable collectibles, so without these, you would have no idea how broken of a character he really is. Instead, coming across as a cross-dressing psychopath, not something like out of Dead Rising. Short of some disjointed flashback scenes of two creepy kids singing something like straight out of Stephen King's The Shining, there's not really much here. Having all the backstory and missable collectibles, it really does just kind of feel disjointed if you're not actively searching for them. I always prefer the show and don't tell mentality, and would like to actually see these implemented in game. However, we weren't treated as such, mostly due to the limitations of hardware at the time. At least I can imagine that. The other main bad that we need to set up here is Albert Wesker, returning from Resident Evil 1, who was also the main bad in that one as well. Wesker, no longer working for Umbrella, shows up here in order to locate a sample of the T Veronica virus in order to take back for his own nefarious plans. Utilizing Chris and Claire, he makes his way to the Antarctic base to locate Alexia, who is now mutated by the T Veronica virus. Amazed by the transformation, he leaves Chris and Claire to basically deal with her, while he tries to steal a sample of the virus on the side. Now, the reason why he's taking this virus really isn't known. He's just kind of there to cause havoc and kind of be that antagonist for Chris. And while Wesker is such a cool fucking character, I wish that he was elaborated a little bit more in this game, as instead of just kind of showing up and going, oh, I'm here, I'm gonna steal this virus now. Chris, your sense of duty knows no bounds. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't hit for me. Like I said, for being such a cool character in the Resident Evil lore, I wish that they had done more with Wesker here, which we will see in later games, so fear not. Like I said, it's not necessarily bad that he shows up, much like Chris, he's just a cool generic bad guy. I just wish there was more reason for him to actually exist in this game. Following the theme of the villains themselves, the setting of Code Veronica suffers from the same disjointedness as the villains do. Much like the first two games in the series, we begin in one main location, only to move on to a more laboratory, industrial type scenery later, such as the Spencer Manor and the labs below, or the police station and the sewer labs. There's a lot of labs in these games. Beginning on Rockford Island, which as a location feels weird as well. Being an Umbrella prison facility, this also houses a military complex, catacombs below that, a mansion where Alexi lives, and an underwater submarine base. This area feels like a bunch of mini areas kind of just shoved in one space. What it lacks the most, however, is character. Looking back at the Spencer Manor and at RCPD, these areas oozed with character, allowing the space to become arguably a main character of the series in and of itself. Resident Evil 3 did begin to lose this with the scope of the space it was playing in being an entire city, but Code Veronica just feels all over the place. All of these areas on the island are drastically different from each other, and to me, it just doesn't mesh very well. Couple this with the fact that they are so spread out from each other, not only makes each area feel really secluded and by itself, but it also makes backtracking feel way longer than needed, and you do a lot of backtracking in this game. After the main climax of the story, where they fly off an island in a plane, I don't know how they know how to fly it, and we end up in the southern ice cap of Antarctica, where yet again, another area that just feels kind of disjointed, with areas that look like a mansion, all of the Spencer Mansion, labs, and a giant ice sheet, which has some zombies underneath it. With the amount of differing locale visited here in Code Veronica, everything feels really slapped together to lead me to be pretty confused as to what was actually happening in the narrative, and making every area pretty unremarkable at best and severely disjointed at worst. The need to add more in different types of areas than the last few games had just didn't work for me here in Resident Evil, a series whose bones were built on interesting and thoughtful locations and creating a variety of space within the confines of a singular focus. Between Code Veronica and Resident Evil 3, the scope creep is on full display here, needing to make their locales varied and large in scope, because that's what the trend is in video games, thus leading to each being less and less interesting. And while being bland sucks, they also host what may be the worst aspect of this game, the boss fights. I'm not here to oversell Resident Evil on its boss fight mechanics thus far. Given the control schemes and the fixed camera angles of tank controls and fixed cameras, the fights on display in this series, while a spectacle in the visual department and looks pretty good, all these fights do leave something to be desired. From the Snake and Tyrant to Resident Evil 1 to Mr. X and the multiple encounters with a mutated Birkin in Resident Evil 2, it was essentially just run away and shoot the guy in a small room. And while some of these encounters areas really sucked, a few of them had enough space to maneuver that actually made you feel like you had a chance to run away and regroup yourself. Code Veronica has none of any of that in these boss areas here. When fighting the Tyrant, you're in the back of a tiny cargo plane, where you almost are always in range of his attacks, if not his charge attack, which can knock you off the fucking plane. This fight just straight sucks. While fighting Alexia, you're on a tiny square platform with her mutated form taking up 1/3 of the space, and her ads she lets out at you, and there's a lot of them, taking up another third, leaving you just this tiny little area to actually try to maneuver in. The only fight that actually makes sense and feels okay is the Alexander fight on the helipad, but given the length of his attacks and the ability to just straight knock you off the edge and ending the fight real quick, this fight kind of sucks as well. In these early Resident Evil games, the play space the boss was set in is what determines if the fight was going to be okay and fair, or miserable and terrible. And in Code Veronica, between the cramped arenas and bullshit mechanics these guys toss at you, including the insta-gibs of knocking you off a ledge, these boss fights are just not good, more so than the other bosses in the Resident Evil series thus far. And going back into all these games in the last few months, these early fights in the series are all pretty painful, but Code Veronica has taken the cake by far. Regarding the narrative of Code Veronica, much like the other games in the series so far as well, the main focal point is to, well, escape. As Claire, you work with Steven to move through Rockmorn Island, learning about each other along the way, and while Steve is in search for his father, who we've learned through his recollections that he was learning what Umbrella was up to and hence being sent here as a prisoner, and subsequently mutated by the T-virus. Coming to grips with the outcome, Steve helps Claire to escape, and as they board the cargo plane and take out the hunting Tyrant, the plane diverts to an Umbrella base in Antarctica, where Alexia is hidden away. Learning of the plight of her and her brother Alfred, the two try to find a way out still, only to have Alfred awaken his sister, who captures the two and takes Steve to God knows where, and leaving Claire for dead. Not to fear though, as Chris is not far behind. Running into Wesker, the two learn about the Antarctica base and head there separately. Chris arrives to save Claire and begins looking for Steve, while Wesker is looking for Alexia to take the sample of the T. Veronica virus. We find Steve, having been mutated by Alexia by said T. Veronica virus, and beginning to lose his mind to the mutation, attempts to subdue Claire, only to regain some semblance of humanity as they express their love for each other in a very awkward scene, and regaining some semblance of humanity, attempts to stop Alexia in her path, and subsequently gets dead. Meanwhile, Chris and Wesker locate Alexia, with Chris taking her on as Wesker moves to escape, scooping up Steve's body along the way out. Defeating Alexia, Chris and Claire escape in a Harrier as the facility self-destructs. Once again, I don't know how they could drive a Harrier, and in typical Resident Evil fashion, get out in the nick of time. We know that this is not the last that we will see of these two, and as the story, while fairly simple in plot, I think works mostly for this type of game. It isn't a numbered entry, and as such, this game does a lot to more build up the lore of Umbrella, Wesker, and our protagonists at the same time. I like the introduction of Steve and actually seeing his loss and mutation give some effect to someone close to you that tries to bear some emotional weight that the other games in the series have lacked thus far. With enough backstory to chew on as well, if you decide to search for it, Code Veronica from a narrative perspective is simple and pretty okay. I feel like I spent a lot of time dunking on Code Veronica, and in truth, I have. I didn't like this game very much, but that being said, these feelings really only exist because of the pedigree set by the ones before it. With lackluster level design, bizarre antagonists, terrible and rage-inducing boss fights, and lack of flow and cohesion with each location in the game, there are still nuggets to enjoy here. Seeing Chris and Claire again is a treat, and while Steve grated on my nerves at first, I do appreciate the attempt of giving something a little bit more emotional weight to the series in the loss of Steve. Coupled Coupling that with the lore built up in Code Veronica, there are still some nuggets of great littered around Code Veronica itself, as long as you're willing to subject yourself to the rest of the game has to offer. And with that, I want to put a bow on Code Veronica. But what did you think of the game? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, and for more videos like this one, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell to see when new videos go live. We are back in full swing, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the long time between videos, between the holidays and being sick. It's just kind of been a rough period. But thank you guys always for watching, and as always, my name is Brendan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.